Okay, so now let's use this fact to think about what these shares actually are. Let's go over here now. Okay, and let's just use the first share. Let's use the first input, and let's think about this input as oil, just to make things clear, and we can think about our chair producers again. Okay, so I minus phi inverse S1. This is one of the two shares that sum up to 1, the new shares that we've defined here. This equals I plus phi squared whole series out times S1. And now what I want to consider is just a single row of this. So to make things easy, I want to think about a single industry and what its cost shares are in this original input. So how do I do that? Well, remember, these are all still I by I matrices, and this is an I by 1 vector. So the ith row, the little ith row of this vector, when it multiplies out, is just going to be the ith row of these matrices times this whole vector. Is that clear to everyone? So really, for industry I, this share for that industry, so now we're construing this as a vector. We're going to take the ith element of that vector. That's just going to be I plus phi squared, so on. Take the ith row of that matrix and all of the columns. Same notation as we had before. Times this vector of initial use shares in oil, let's say. Okay, so now how does this multiply out? Well, what is the ith row of the identity matrix times this whole vector of initial cost shares? Well, it's really just for industry I, the direct cost share that it has in oil. So for our chair manufacturers, I said they basically don't use oil at all. This share is going to be essentially 0. Now what's the next share? The next share is, well, the ith row of the input-output matrix, take all the columns and multiply that by this whole vector of cost shares. What are these? Well, remember, phi I, all the columns, really is how much industry I spends on each intermediate input relative to its cost. So I'm going to write those out now, just to make this ultra clear. Over. So in the denominator, we could say the total cost for industry I. We could say, because sales are going to equal cost in this framework, we could put PIYI on the bottom as well by the profit maximization problem. So there's the convention I'll use is just to put cost in the bottom. This goes all the way up to P capital I, ZI capital I over cost. And now we have this S1 vector, which is how much, now we're looking across industries, how much does each industry directly use oil? That's going to be S11 all the way up to SI1. And so what does this multiply out to? Well, you can kind of see it's what share of my cost is in sector 1, and how much does sector 1 use oil? What share of my cost is in sector 2? How much does sector 2 use oil? All the way up to what share of my cost is in sector I? How much does sector I use oil? So this term of the share coming from the second element of this sum, we usually call second order exposure to oil. Where this term, the first term, would be first order exposure to oil from your direct use of oil. we could go further out, but I think you guys get the point that phi squared is going to be your third order exposure to oil. Yes, question.
And is there any restriction in terms of like which effect is higher? Could you think about like an industry where the second order effect is actually stronger than the first order?
Yes, that's exactly right. And so what we just talked about with the chair manufacturers, for example, they don't use any oil directly. SI1 is 0, but they do use a lot of oil through their suppliers. And really, as a matter of fact, the highest share for them is going to be their second order share. Because the way that it works for these guys is they'll buy, say, petrochemicals. Petrochemicals buy from petroleum refineries, and petroleum refineries are buying oil. So that's the way that that chain finally lands in oil. There's actually a couple of links in between. But there's not a strong restriction, for example, that this share has to be larger than this share. Any other questions on this? Yes?
Great. Just like, but I would assume that as it goes further, like this effect should at one point converge to 0, or am I going crazy here?
That's right. So certainly as you go further out, otherwise that's really the invertibility condition for this. So what we already did back here, this is well behaved enough that yes, that's happening. Yes?
So will this also depend on the granularity of the input-output matrix? If we like do a second digit industry level, let's say that this is the total share of the petrochemical petroleum industry, then you would then have more first-order effects than second-order effects. I don't know.
Right. So this gets to, we still haven't really talked about the input-output data yet, but I guess now is a good time to do that. And then I'll answer your question.